Hey, what's up guys? Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Here in today's video I want to talk about 7th chords. We're going to talk about three different types of 7th chords. Major 7th chords, minor 7th chords, dominant 7th chords. 7th chords are those things that people tend to get scared of. People that are kind of new to theory, you start to see sevens in the chord symbol. That's the point where you're like, alright, it's a little bit too much for me. I don't like those sevens, you know? I've met a lot of guitar players that are like that. The old rhythm guitar player of my old band, he was like, yeah, I was looking up this song, but then they had all these sevens in there, and I was like, too much. This video, I'm hoping to change that, all right? So we're going to talk about 7th chords. Before I get into the theory, I'm just going to go right ahead, and I'm just going to give you the chord shapes. So if you don't care about the theory, I'm just going to give you the shapes at first. So if you want to play a major 7th chord that's rooted on the A string, it's going to have this shape, or this is one of the possible shapes for it at least. So that's a movable shape. I'm playing it right there with the root on the 5th fret of the A string. That's the note D, so that would make this a D major 7 chord. That would make this an E major 7 chord. That would make this an F major 7 chord. So this is a movable shape. So now a dominant 7th chord shape, which is rooted on the A string, is going to have a similar shape, but it just has one slight change to it. So that's going to look like this. So because I'm playing it right here on the 5th fret again, this is going to make this a D dominant 7th chord, otherwise known as just a D7 chord, and that sounds like this. I could play that anywhere. If I were to root it on the 3rd fret of the A string, it becomes a C dominant 7 chord. Alright, so it's a movable shape. You can play that anywhere. So now let's look at the minor 7th chord shape rooted on the A string. Again, I want to start right here just for the sake of example. That's the note D, 5th fret of the A string. So you apply this shape right here. That's a minor 7th chord shape. Play it up here, it becomes a G minor 7 chord. Play it here, it becomes an A minor 7 chord. It's a movable shape, it can be played anywhere. So now let's look at the same three chords but rooted on the low E string now. So I'm going to do these in a slightly different order because the major 7th chord that's rooted on the low E string is actually the hardest one of these to play for this particular bar chord shape that I'm using. So let's start off with the minor 7ths. Okay, so if I want to play right here, this is the note A, 5th fret of the low E string. So if I want to play an A minor 7 chord, it's going to have this shape right here. Alright, so if I move that up to, say, the 7th fret, then it becomes a B minor 7. Move it up to here, it becomes a C minor 7. Alright, so let's look at a dominant 7th chord shape. So just for the sake of example, we'll start on the 5th fret again. So we're going to play an A dominant 7th chord, and that's going to look like this. Move it down to the 3rd fret, it becomes a G dominant 7 chord. Move it to the 1st fret, it becomes an F dominant 7 chord. So finally, we're going to look at the major 7th chord shape that is rooted on the low E string. So out of all the shapes I've shown you so far, this is the most difficult one. But I'm going to give you a little trick, and this is the way that I think about it that helps me out. So if you take this open A minor chord shape like this, but you instead rearrange it, so instead of using your 1st, 2nd, and 3rd finger, you instead use your 2nd, 3rd, and 4th finger. You play an A minor chord like that, an open A minor chord like that. You can then slide that up to wherever you want. So let's slide it up to here, and then I'm going to take my 1st finger and I'm going to put it on the 5th fret. This is a little tricky. So you're also going to be muting out the A string. You don't want that note involved. So you want the root note, which is right here, and then you want these 3 notes. So that's an A major 7 chord. You also want to mute out the high E string as well. You can include it in there if you want, but you don't have to. So that is the major chord shape. So playing it right there, that's an A major 7 chord. If I were to move that shape up to the 7th fret, it becomes a B major 7 chord. If I want to move it up to, the 10th fret, it becomes a D major 7 chord. Alright, so those are the shapes. Now let's get into the theory. Alright, so 7th chords are the next level up beyond triads. If you haven't seen my video that I did a few weeks ago, it's called Let's Talk About Triads. Check that out. Triads are 3-note chords. 7th chords are 4-note chords. So you're just adding one additional note to triads in order to create these 7th chords. So in any of the 12 keys, you have 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and 1 diminished type of chord. So what I'm really saying there is you have 3 major triads, 3 minor triads, and 1 diminished triad in any of the 12 keys. So where do these triads come from? Like, why do we have 3 major, 3 minor, and 1 diminished triad in any given key? Well, take any one of the 12 possible key signatures, which is the major scale. So you have 12 possible major scales from which to choose from. That's why you have 12 keys. So take the key of, say, C major. That's an easy one. It doesn't have any sharps, doesn't have any flats in it, just has 7 natural notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. So how do we derive these triads from the C major scale? All you have to do is you start on the note C and then play every other note until you have 3 notes. That's how you get the first triad found in the key of C major. You can try this for any of the 12 major scales. It's going to work exactly the same way. I'm just using the C major scale to demonstrate this example. So if you want to get the second triad in the key of C major, you start on the second note of the C major scale, and then you play every other note until you have 3 notes. The result is D, F, A. That's a D minor chord. You can keep doing that, and you're going to find that you have 3 major triads, 3 minor triads, and 1 diminished triad. So what makes C, E, G a major triad, and what makes D, F, A a minor triad? Why is that? Well, you have to look at the spacing between the notes. This is the intervals. So if you start on C and you look at the distance between C and E, you can use a guitar to do this, you can use a piano to do this, you can use whatever instrument you want, but you're going to find that the distance between C and E is 4 semitones, or 4 half steps, or 4 frets. There's a C right here on the 3rd fret. 1, 2, 3, 4, there's an E. So that is known as a major third interval. And then between the C and the G, you're going to find that you have 7 semitones, or 7 half steps. 7 half steps or 7 semitones is known as a perfect 5th interval. So when you have your root note, and then the next note is a major third higher, and then the next note after that is a perfect 5th higher, root third 5th, that's what makes a major triad. Now you can do the same type of analysis with the D, F, and A, and you're going to find that the distance between the notes D and F is only 3 semitones, or 3 half steps. That is what is known as a minor third interval. So D to F is a minor third, and then D to A is going to be 7 semitones. So you can do the same type of thing to all 7 of these triads that you create, and you will find that the first one is always going to be a major triad, the second one's always going to be minor triad, the third one's always going to be minor, the fourth one's going to be major, 5th is major, 6th is minor, 7th is a diminished triad. So the reason that that's called a diminished triad, again, you have to look at the distance between the notes. So B, D, F. So the distance between B and D, so here's B, so 1, 2, 3, so that distance is 3 semitones away, or 3 frets, or 3 half steps. That's a minor third interval. So then going from B to F, so here's your B on the 2nd fret of the A string, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so the distance between B and F is only 6 semitones away. So that's not a perfect 5th anymore. That's known as a diminished 5th. So root, minor third, diminished 5th. That gives you what is known as a diminished triad. You can do the same analysis for all 12 keys. Again, you just take the major scale of the key in question. You get your triads by starting on a note, taking every other note until you have 3, and then you look at the distance between the notes, and then that gives you the answer that you're looking for. Is it a major triad, is it a minor triad, or is it a diminished triad? It works the same way for all 12 keys. So the reason that I walked you through that process right there is because that is the first step to understanding where 7th chords come from. With 7th chord, you're now just adding 1 additional note. So take the major scale in question. So we're just using C major as our example for this video, but it's going to work exactly the same way for any of the 12 possible major scales. So you start on the note C, you take every other note, but this time you do it until you have 4 notes instead of 3. So when you do that, you have C, E, G, B. Those are the 4 notes, and that gives you what is known as a C major 7 chord. Now do the same thing starting on the note D, and do the same thing. So you start on the note D, you take every other note until you have 4, so it's D, F, A, C. That's your 2nd chord. That is known as a D minor 7 chord. Work through this process for all 7 potential starting notes for the major scale in question, and you're going to find that the first chord is always going to be a major 7th chord. Second chord is always going to be a minor 7th chord. Third chord is going to be a minor 7th chord. Fourth chord is going to be a major 7th chord. Fifth chord is going to be a dominant 7th chord. Sixth chord is going to be a minor 7th chord. And then the 7th chord is known as a half diminished chord, otherwise known as a minor 7 flat 5 chord. So I know that can sound a little scary, but it's not quite as bad as you may think it is. So even though it appears that there's all these different types of 7th chords that are created in the key, you have major 7ths, you have minor 7ths, you have dominant 7ths, and you have this half diminished chord. So there's really only 2 different types of 7th intervals that are in play here. So the first type of 7th interval is known as a major 7th interval, and the second type of 7th is a minor 7th interval. So we've already worked through how to come up with our triads. So if you have a triad and then you add an extra note that is 10 half steps higher than the original note, then that is known as a minor 7th interval. If you add an interval that is 11 half steps higher than the original starting note, that is known as a major 7th interval. So another way to look at this is a major 7th interval is always going to be just a half step below the root, or minor 7th interval is going to be a whole step below the root. So let me give you some examples to show you what I'm talking about. So let's start on the C major 7th chord, the first chord found in the key of C major in 7th form. So you have C, E, G, B. So we already know that the distance between C and E is 4 half steps. That's a major 3rd interval. We know that C to G is 7 half steps. That's a perfect 5th interval. So the distance between C and B is a major 7th interval. It's 11 half steps away. You could also just say, okay, the distance between C and B is found 1 half step below the root. That's also a major 7th interval. All right, so for all of these chords, it's the triad plus either a major 7th interval or the triad plus the minor 7th interval. So the first chord is a major triad plus a major 7th interval. The result is a major 7th chord. The second chord is a minor triad plus a minor 7th interval. The result is a minor 7th chord. Third chord is a minor triad plus a minor 7th interval. That's a minor 7th chord again. Fourth chord is a major triad plus a major 7th interval. That's a major 7th chord. Fifth chord is a major triad plus a minor 7th interval. That is known as a dominant 7th chord, otherwise known as just a 7th chord. And then that final chord, that weird funky half diminished chord, that is a diminished triad plus a minor 7th interval. So diminished triad plus a minor 7th interval results in this half diminished chord. That's what it's called, otherwise known as a minor 7 flat 5 chord. So the final thing I want to talk about in this video is how you can use the circle of fifths to come up with the same information that we had just worked out. So without worrying about all the theory, without worrying about all the intervals and all the interval spacing and half steps away from the root and all that stuff, you can just take your circle of fifths. You can pick the key in question. Which one of the 12 keys do you want to determine the chords for? We'll just start with C because that's the key that we've been using for all these examples. So you find the C on the outer circle of the circle of fifths. That's the key in question. The grouping of 6 surrounding the C, that gives you your triads. The circle of fifths that I'm using, it doesn't have the diminished chords on there. It only displays the major chords and the minor chords. So this grouping of 6 is only giving you 6 of the 7 total chords for the key in question. But those are the chords that you're probably going to be using most of the time anyway. All right, so taking that a step further, taking it into the 7th form, all the chords on the inner circle, they all become minor 7th chords. So that's pretty easy to remember. The chord that's on the outer circle clockwise position, that's your 1 dominant 7th chord of the key. Every key just has that 1 dominant 7th chord in there. And then the other 2 chords, those are your major 7th chords. So that's not too much stuff to remember. This works for any of the keys. Let's say you want to determine the chords for the key of G major. That's one of the 12 possible keys. So you have your 3 major and 3 minor triads for the key signature of G major. So the inner circle, those all become minor 7th chords. outer circle clockwise chord, that's your dominant 7th chord for that key. And then the other 2 chords are major 7th chords. So the circle of fifths, it takes all that theory that we just worked through and it basically compiles it into a nice little cheat sheet for you. And I do want to say one other thing. I know I lied. I said that the circle of fifths thing was going to be the last thing, but this is actually the last thing. Super, super important. When you see the word maj in a chord symbol, that is always referring to the type of 7th that is in the chord. It is not referring to the triad. If you see a C maj 7, that's telling you that it's a C major triad with a major 7th interval added onto it. So it's a C major 7th chord. If you see a C7, so it's a C and then there's a 7, but you don't see that word maj in there, that is a C major triad with a minor 7th type of interval. That creates what is known as a dominant 7th chord, otherwise known as just a C7 chord. So there is actually a type of chord known as a minor major 7th chord. And you're going to see that chord if you take the harmonic minor scale or the melodic minor scale, which is kind of beyond the scope of this video. But you write out the notes of the harmonic minor scale, for example, and you do the same thing. You start on the first note, you take every other note until you have 4 notes. You look at the intervals between each of the notes. You're going to find out that your first chord in the harmonic minor scale is a minor triad with a major 7th interval. That is known as a minor major 7th chord. Maj is always referring to the type of 7th that is in the chord symbol. It does not have any impact on whether the triad is major, minor, diminished, nothing. Maj applies to the type of 7th. If you see a C major 9 chord, that means that there is a C major triad, there's a major 7th interval in there in that chord, and then you also have this other note, this other color note known as the 9. If you see just a C9 chord, there's no maj there. Again, you have a C major triad. It's a minor 7th interval. It's not a major 7th interval. And then you have that 9 color note added in there as well. Maj refers to the type of 7th that is in the chord, not the triad. All right, so I think I've stressed that point enough. I've said it like 10 times now. Hopefully I got my point across. So that's going to do it for this video. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.